In this video, we're going to talk about the 5 things that you absolutely must know before buying a house in Mobile or Baldwin County, or for that matter, all over Lower Alabama. So let's dive in. Hey, my name is Jeff Jones with Keller Williams right here in the beautiful city of Mobile, Alabama, where I've lived my entire life. You know, people are always calling me, they're texting me, they're shooting me emails, and they have questions about what it's like moving to Mobile, Baldwin County, or pretty much anywhere in Lower Alabama. And the reason why, you know, I've lived here my whole life, and I try and do my best to give you all the details, to answer questions, to show you about the area. You know, not just feature house tours, but show you about the area, talk about the schools, talk about all the things that you need to know before making the big move. And in this video, well, what I want to talk about are things that you need to know so that it won't be a surprise to you. We're going to talk about those 5 specific things that you need to know. And the last one, well, it's almost hard to believe, but it's true, and it's just how we do things in the state of Alabama. So stay tuned until the very end, where we're going to talk about that very important thing that you absolutely have to know. Well, let's go ahead and get started with number 1. If we start with number 1, it's what I think is the most important thing you can do before buying a house. And before moving forward, you absolutely have to have a home inspection. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to walk around the house and they're going to absolutely tear it apart. And the thing is, you know, these are not just people who've been in the business for a little while. If you go to my website, livinginmobile.com, you can click on a tab that says recommended vendors, scroll down and look up home inspectors. These are people that I've worked with on dozens and dozens of houses, and they really know what they're talking about. So some of them are previous contractors. You know, they really know the nuts and bolts, all the details of what's involved. I always tell people, now I'm working with my buyers, I'll say, now listen, it's their job to tear this house apart, honestly, to make it look like one of the worst houses that was ever built. And the reason why is because you don't want any surprises. You know, you don't want to move in 2 weeks after closing in the heat of the summer and then your air conditioning break and you find out that it was something crazy wrong, that there was a problem that's been a problem for a long time. And if you'd found that out ahead of time, well, you could have mentioned it, could have written up an addendum and asked for the seller to address that. So there are a lot of different possibilities, and the main thing is you do not want any surprises. So keep in mind, a home inspection, you know, it may last, I don't know, an hour and a half all the way to all day long, but it's their job to walk around. They're going to take pictures of the HVAC, they're going to do tests, they're going to climb up on the roof. You know, they're going to talk about all the details so that there are absolutely no surprises. So getting a home inspection, that is vital, and honestly, I think it's the most important thing that you can do. So the number 2 thing that you absolutely have to know, well, it's all about termites. Now I'm standing on top of what's called a bait station, and well, let me just say that termites in this area are a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is they call it like the silent killer of houses. And the reason why is you can never know about it. Maybe you don't see any signs, and then all of a sudden you discover a problem, and then bam, it's like $15,000 worth of damage, and you had no clue. I've seen that happen before. And so in order to prevent that, what we do when we write the purchase agreement, we make it contingent on having a termite inspection. But also, when you move forward with buying the house, we're also going to get you a termite bond that's going to be part of the deal. And so, you know, whether the seller provides it, whether you provide it as the buyer, it's very important. And the way it works is the termite company is going to come out and they're going to do a visual inspection. So they'll walk around the house with a flashlight on the inside. They're looking up top, they're looking down bottom, and they do this all the time. So they're, you know, they know exactly what to look for. And then on the outside, well, they're going to look for certain things as well. And then once you move forward with getting that bond in place, depending on which company you go with, they're going to put these bait stations all around the house. And so if you're working with me in the buying process and we're out house shopping, looking at different houses, you're going to notice these on all kinds of houses. Some of them are green, some of them are black. So it really just depends, but it's very, very important. And the cost of that, well, they do what's called a realtor special that you can purchase at the beginning if it's part of the transaction. So it's anywhere from about $400 to probably about $600, and that covers the inspection as well as the termite bond for a year. And then you have an opportunity to renew that every single year. And again, it's going to be from around $350 to around $550. And so it's very important because what they do is they offer what's called a retreatment and replacement bond. And what that means is if there's a problem and termites destroy like a $10,000 section of your house, well, having that bond in place, it's gonna take care of that, it's gonna resolve it, and it's gonna replace it and bring it back to the condition that it was before the damage. So that is very, very important. You absolutely have to have a termite bond. So before we get to number 3, something just hit me when we were talking earlier about the home inspection. You know, when I'm shopping with buyers who are out of town, one of the things they always ask me is, Jeff, why are there no gutters on the roof? Now, of course, there are gutters sometimes, but I always tell people, I know this is gonna sound kind of crazy, but gutters down here, in a lot of scenarios, it's almost like a luxury item. And so I would say the vast majority of houses that I show, they do not have gutters. And I was talking with a home inspector about this. I said, why is that? And he said it has a lot to do with the type of soil we have. So it's different, but also it doesn't snow hardly at all in this area. So it has an impact on that as well. So just a little unknown fact about the houses down here in lower Alabama. Things can be a little bit different, and there often is a lack of gutters around the house. So just keep that in mind. You may not see gutters when you think there should be. Now, as we go on to item number 3, what I'm holding here is a letter that has to do with property tax. It just showed up, and actually, it talked about the value of the home. It talked about the assessment. So we have this thing down here called homestead. And so Alabama is a homestead state. And what that means is if you live in the house and it's actually your place of residence, then you have what's called homestead at that house. However, if you are a landlord, you own this house, but you don't actually live there, then you do not get to claim homestead on the house. And so what happens with that is if you do have homestead, then your property tax is half. But if you do not have homestead, then your property tax is going to be double. So keep that in mind. And what happens is if you're looking at a house, and say we're shopping at a house, you find a house at a great price, but it's really tight with what you can afford or what you're pre-approved with, well, if that house used to be a rental, then they're not going to have homestead on that house. And so when you first buy it, then your property tax that will be put in escrow is going to be double than what it would be otherwise if you actually live there. I know that may be a little confusing, but just know this. Alabama is a homestead state, and as soon as you buy that house, the title company, they're going to talk with you and they're going to say, now, be sure and go down to this area where you're going to file for it, and do not forget to do that before the deadline, because if you don't, then that property tax, if there was already homestead filed there, it's going to double for that payment next year. So keep that in mind. Understanding homestead is very important. Number 4, that is a very important thing that you absolutely have to understand. I just got a letter in the mail from a homeowner's insurance, just an update. And one of the things I want to say is people who are from other states around the country, often they think that if you move to this area, you're going to have flood insurance. And I will tell you that in almost all cases, that is not required. Really, the only time it's going to be required is if you're actually on the water or if you're in a low-lying area that's close to the water. Well, the majority of houses in this area are not going to fall under that category. But what you will be required to have is a traditional homeowner's policy, and then you're going to be required to have what we like to call a hurricane policy, which is technically a wind and hail policy. So you put all that together, and that's what you're going to have if you move to this area. But I will say that the majority of houses do not have to have flood insurance. But if you're comparing homeowners rates with other rates around the country, I've seen things tend to go up and up and up. So what I would encourage you to do is don't just buy the homeowners and the hurricane policy, but combine that so that you can get a group discount with your auto policy. If you have an umbrella policy, put everything together, and that will hopefully give you a steep discount rather than buying it as a separate policy. So keep that in mind when you're shopping for houses. But understand, in almost all cases, you're not going to have flood insurance. And the last one, well, this check is going to represent earnest money. And I will tell you that the way that earnest money is handled in the state of Alabama, it can be a little different than some other states. Now, I've only had this be an issue a couple of times, and it got resolved pretty quickly. But let me tell you kind of how earnest money goes so you'll be prepared. Now, if I'm working with you and we're looking to buy a house, you put in an offer on a house, that offer gets accepted, well, you're going to have earnest money due usually within about 24 hours of when that offer gets accepted. And so the way this works is if you're out of town, and maybe I showed the house to you virtually, then you're just going to wire that money into our escrow account. But if you're in town, physically you can just drive by, drop off a check, and then it goes into that escrow account. And then of course that money is then credited to the purchase price of the home at the closing table. Now, here's the thing. What if we're, moving forward on the purchase and you have an inspection and maybe you have a septic inspection and, say you find out some things about the house that are not too great and you really decide, you know what, I can't live with that. We want to walk away, so we want to ask for our earnest money back. Well, guess what? If you do that, not only do you, the buyer, have to sign a document, but also the seller has to sign a document. And so what if the seller doesn't sign it? That earnest money just sits there until both the buyer and the seller can agree. But then once they agree on what to do with it, then that earnest money can be released to you. I've never really had that be an issue except for a couple of times, and like I mentioned, it got resolved quickly. But if nobody agrees, then it's just going to sit in the escrow account for a very long time, and then you can maybe come up with a creative solution. Of course, you could get the courts involved, and that's a whole different issue. But I've had scenarios where the buyer got half of it, the seller got half of it. But usually, in almost all cases, the seller signs off and the buyer gets the money back. So honestly, I wouldn't stress over that too much. It's rarely been an issue, but I think you need to understand that both the buyer and the seller have to agree on what is done with the earnest money. And that's it, folks. Here I am on my front porch enjoying the beautiful weather, which is honestly the reason that so many people want to move to Mobile, Alabama. It's gorgeous today. It's in April. It's around 70 degrees right now. The sun's getting ready to set behind me. I've got a creek behind me. It's really beautiful. But hey, thank you so much for watching. Now, don't forget, if you'll click the link below, you'll get to actually get a copy of the free city guide put out by the Mobile Chamber of Commerce. It's going to answer a ton of your questions about all things related to the city of Mobile. But I love it when people reach out to me, whether it's a text message, a phone call, an email, any way they want to connect. I absolutely love it. I love it when the phone rings and I get to talk with you all about making the transition and the big journey down to Lower Alabama. But I can't wait for the phone call to ring, and hopefully I can help answer your questions. But reach out, let me know if there's any way I can help you.